Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is February 6th. On this day in 1980, one of America's most infamous murder trials started in Chicago, Illinois. The trial of John Wayne Gacy. Gacy was convicted of murdering 33 young men and boys, many of whom were found buried beneath his suburban home. Today, we're going to take a look back at Gacy's crimes and the trial that changed how we look at our neighbors forever. Let's get started. To understand the weight of Gacy's trial, we need to revisit the horrific crimes that brought him there. Between 1972 and 1976, John Wayne Gacy lured 33 men and boys into his home in Norwood Park Township, a suburb of Chicago. In some cases, he promised them jobs. In other cases, he offered them a place to stay, or sometimes it was simply companionship. But when these boys and men arrived at Gacy's home, they didn't find what they were promised. Instead, they found a literal house of horrors. Gacy tortured and murdered these boys and men and buried most of them in the crawl space of his home. Others he discarded in nearby rivers. These horrors went on for years until December 1978, when 15-year-old Robert Peast vanished. He had told his mother that he was going to see a contractor about a potential job. And that contractor was John Wayne Gacy. When Robert didn't come home, his family immediately knew that something was terribly wrong, and they reported him missing to police. As police investigated Gacy's seemingly normal life, he was a respected businessman, a precinct captain in the local Democratic Party. He was a man who even dressed up as a clown for charity events. This normal life began to crumble. Police were able to get him under surveillance, and that's when they began to see the real John Wayne Gacy. Gacy was displaying odd and nervous behavior, and it really set the police's antennas up. They knew that they needed to dig deeper. They were able to secure a search warrant for Gacy's home, and once they did that, it was game over. When officers executed the search warrant, they found chilling evidence, including personal belongings that were linked to several missing boys. Eventually, the truth came out. Gacy confessed to the murders and described them in gruesome detail. He referred to his victims as collateral damage and showed absolutely no remorse. When the full scope of his crimes was revealed, the public was, of course, horrified. This had been going on in an affluent suburb for years, just right under everybody's noses. With the evidence stacked against him, prosecutors were prepared to pursue the death penalty. The trial opened on February 6, 1980, drawing a massive level of public attention. It wasn't just about Gacy, it was about the lives he had stolen, the community he had terrorized, and the justice system's responsibility to ensure that he never had the opportunity to hurt anyone again. The prosecution, led by William Kunkel, made their stance clear from the very beginning. John Wayne Gacy was not insane. He was a cold, calculating predator. In his opening statement, Kunkel told the jury, quote, "This was not madness. This was evil, cold, and calculated," end quote. The defense, led by Sam Amarante, had no real way to argue against the mountain of evidence that was stacked up against his client. So instead, he went with the only possible strategy, claiming that Gacy was legally insane and didn't fully understand his actions. Amarante told the jury, quote, "What we have here is a man whose mind was broken," end quote. But convincing the jury that Gacy wasn't responsible for his actions would prove to be quite the uphill battle. Prosecutors laid out the gruesome details of Gacy's crimes, presenting some of the most horrifying evidence ever seen in a courtroom. Investigators described the discovery of 29 bodies beneath Gacy's home. Each one was carefully buried, proving that this was not random violence, but methodical, premeditated murder. Kunkel argued, quote, "This was not a man acting in a fit of rage. This was someone who had planned and executed these crimes with chilling precision," end quote. Forensic experts took the stand to explain how they identified the victims using dental records, skeletal analysis, and personal items found in Gacy's home. These testimonies were absolutely gut-wrenching. Families of the victims had to sit in the courtroom and listen to the clinical details of how their loved ones were found. Gacy's lawyers knew that they couldn't really prove his innocence, so they focused on trying to spare his life by arguing that he was legally insane. They claimed Gacy suffered from multiple personality disorder and that his alter ego, Jack, was actually responsible for the murders. Psychiatrists for the defense testified that Gacy showed signs of severe mental illness and argued that he was incapable of understanding the consequences of his actions. But the prosecution wasn't buying it. One expert countered, quote, "This wasn't the work of a man out of control. This was someone who knew exactly what he was doing, and he worked hard to cover his tracks," end quote. And Gacy himself did nothing to help his case. Throughout the trial, he smirked, he made crude jokes, and referred to his victims in dehumanizing terms. His lack of remorse only solidified the jury's perception of him as a manipulative predator, not a man who had lost touch with reality. After 5 weeks of gut-wrenching testimony, the jury deliberated for just a few hours. Their decision was swift and unanimous. John Wayne Gacy was guilty on all 33 counts of murder, along with charges of sexual assault and other crimes. The sentence? Death. Families of the victims wept, hugged, and held on to one another. One father summed it up best, saying, "This doesn't bring my son back, but it's justice. That's all we ever wanted," end quote. Gacy, however, remained defiant. As he was led out of the courtroom, he dismissed the verdict as, quote, "a circus," still refusing to take responsibility for his horrific crimes. Gacy's case became a crucial study for FBI profilers trying to understand serial killers. His ability to lead a double life, respectable businessman by day, sadistic murderer by night, forced law enforcement to rethink how they identified dangerous predators. Gacy's nickname, the Killer Clown, added another layer to his infamy, stemming from his habit of dressing as Pogo the Clown at charity events. His crimes have since inspired books, films, and documentaries, but families of the victims continue to remind the world to remember them, not him. After spending 14 years on death row, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection on May 10th, 1994. His final words were, "Kiss my ass." Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube. And be sure to join me tomorrow as we delve into another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!